Hi, welcome to another kind of podcast, Zoom interview discussion on the polemics of life and things that are stupid, things that are amazing. And I love having multi-passionate people to talk to. And there's someone who I've been following. So I'm very happy to have the wonderful Kyle Koch here today. So hi, Kyle, welcome. Thank you.
Hey, Julie, I'm super excited to chat with you. You've been a huge inspiration in my life. So I'm stoked to, be in dialogue and see what insights emerge.
Yeah, I'm happy to I'm an introvert, but I'm an extroverted thinker, apparently. So like when things happen in conversation, that's when stuff happens. So I really like that. So you've been actually like the host of introducing me for quite a few summits and things like that. So I feel like, I got my tables reversed now. I'm asking you stuff, which is cool. So just for anyone who doesn't know, so you're like, where are you right now? What are you doing right now? And what have you been doing recently?
Yeah, I'm currently on the Olympic Peninsula here in Washington State. And I'm actually in a self-cultivated void in my life where I'm in the autumn, the falling of the leaves, the letting go of responsibilities and things, and kind of settling down for a bit in a weird kind of nomadic way. But I'm actually out here helping my younger brother and my friend working on a permaculture project, doing stream restoration, which we are going to plant like hundreds of nut trees and native edible plants and kind of, help restore an overgrazed farmland.
Amazing. So my kind of like, if someone said like, oh, like what's Kyle about? What's he into? I'd be like, oh, he's this movement guy who's awesome at parkour, but he's like deep in nature, and he used to be some kind of tech guy. And then you just like went back to the land. And now you do this kind of, you're now part of a project that does sort of nature retreats, and you're part of Evolve, Move, Play when they do that work with movement and play and community in nature. And so you're all over the shop, and I love that, because everything you're doing is kind of like, ooh, tell me about all your nature stuff. Like, and then it's like, ooh, tell me about how is it for you when you had this kind of reinvention or choice in life, because we can all be multi-passionate across many domains. I'm all for less responsibility, and it's a kind of like nomadic minimalism of where you really value things in life. So take us back a little bit on your journey, so for people to get an insight of the many Kyles that there are and have been.
There have been, for sure. He is still in an adaptive evolutionary process. But once upon a time, I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is a major metropolitan city, known for drinking and partying, which I was an active participant of. That was my favorite pastime, spending many, many late nights in the bars and clubs. And during the day, I was an IT professional. I worked for a major software company, and we did label making software. So like any barcode that you see, that you scanned, the company I worked for, our software produced those labels and barcodes. And I helped many people through their IT issues. I was finding myself dissatisfied. I found myself not having any like skills that did not involve a computer, the internet, or electricity. And even if one of those was absent, my skill level was highly diminished. And I was like feeling that disconnection and the lack of usefulness, I guess. And I was really into nature survival shows, Man versus Wild, dual survival, all those things. And I signed up for my first like wilderness survival class that was based around tracking, fire, and awareness. And in that experience, I made my first primitive fire with a bow drill. You take some sticks and you rub them together really fast. And I made a coal and I blew that coal into flames. And in that moment, a deep awakening happened. I realized that I am an infinite well of potential. And once I realized that, I knew that I needed to pursue that. I was like, wow, like something happened. I need to catch the energy while it's going. And at that point, I cashed out my Google ads in 2011. So before Google.
Early adopter.
I was early into Google ads. So I had some money and I went to Washington to attend the Wilderness Awareness School's 9-month immersion program.
Wow.
So that was 9 months in wilderness survival, wildlife tracking, edible plants, bird language. And one of the most powerful things for me was actually community and mentoring skills, which really, I thought I was going to this school to learn how to live in the woods. And I learned a lot of those skills and I went on many survival trips. But really what awakened was this deep sense of wanting to be a mentor and wanting to be a facilitator. And I left the program and I was a wilderness therapy guide for 1 year. And I was applying these skills to at-risk youth in nature. And I was seeing profound transformation, but I didn't really understand why. I'm like, why is time in nature, through these cultural mentoring, through nature connection and participatory kind of knowing, why is this having a profound effect on these children? And so I ended up going back to the Wilderness Awareness School to deconstruct that. So I worked there for 6 years. I got to interview all of the adult students before the program, watch them go through this transformative experience and come out the other side. And while I was doing all that, I was researching and listening to podcasts and kind of asking these deeper questions and both getting the science and kind of the esoteric answer to why nature is transformative, why nature is powerful, and why it is necessary in our lives. And that I've been kind of on that journey of answering that question and then breaking it down to the minimal effective dose. So people don't have to spend 9 months in an immersive environment. Can they learn these skills in a weekend? Can they integrate them into their lives in a city? How can we bring this? How can I be a bridge of nature and modernity in a way that feels connective?
First of all, that sounds amazing. So I did a 2-week kind of wilderness bushcraft skills at the Hidden Path School in Texas, run by Sam Kaufman. And
I know Sam. I've met that school's amazing. I did a week there.
So, those 2 weeks were transformative. And in terms of, so we started off with, I think there were 18 of us who did week 1, and then 5 of us who made it through to the end of week 2. And I was the only woman who ended up making it. There were 2 other ladies who started the week 2, and I was the only woman who that they were vegetarians, and they were just cold the whole time. And my debris shelter was awesome. It was I was snug as a bug in a rug. I was just this is the best thing I have ever made. But so for me to think shit, I remember, to this day, the feeling of, and Sam had kind of pre-warned us as well, that, when you leave here, the level of stimulation that you're going to experience, it's not like you're on holiday and then you just go back to life. No. so my partner at the time picked me up, and then I think we went to a Starbucks so I could get like a tea. And I was just like, oh my God, this is a spaceship. And you start looking at everything. I was like, the resources to make this cup, the energy to boil that water. And we have yet this like, just like, I'm sat here now and like we're on a Zoom call, and I'm like the desk in front of me, there's 2 camera drones, and then there's some headphones, there's a pile of books, and there's glasses, and I have food and water available to me. Like, hot water comes out of a tap. It's like, and my first experience of the bow drill and making a fire was probably one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. And the poetry that I found within to swear was extraordinary. So at the end of the 2 weeks, no, it was the end of the first week. I think it was like the kind of transition thing. You did this sort of 24-hour, 48-hour out on your own, and you had different skills that you had to complete. And like you would do one, and then you'd go back to where, not Sam, I can't remember the guy's name, sorry, who was running that one. And then you would kind of like get your next tool. So like first of all, you had to like go and find your site, and then you had to build a certain amount of cordage out of the natural plants in the area. And then you'd bring your cordage back. And then when you got that, you were then given your next task. And then you had to like make a kind of flint knife and then do something. And it kind of built up to basically you had to build a fire on your own that night. And I had this perfect like keystone shaped, like, you know, the architecture of my fire was awesome. I was really good at finding stuff. And it was, you know, it was like arts and crafts came alive. It was like just amazing. But fuck, I could not light this thing. It was like, and it was like, I remember like it was getting really, really cold and staring up at the stars and just being like, no, because this would determine great night, horrible night.
For sure.
It was just my ability to apply this skill. And it was cold, and it was in December. So December in Texas, San Antonio, it's cold and it's a bit damp. It's not like, oh, it's like a tinderbox, whee, everything lights. It was like, so anyway, I have memories that will stay with me for a lifetime. So you're watching people, you're there for a really, really long time, and you're in research mode. And like, as you're talking, it's like, it just reminds me of my parkour research. Like, what is this thing and what's it doing and why is it doing that? And what are the mechanisms? And you yourself are changed as a result, but you're not always aware of it in the moment. So whilst you're observing and doing this work, how were you embodying the changes yourself? Or were you aware? What was happening to you during those 6 years?
Yeah, there was like a revelation of like the profoundness of each of the activities, and almost a reorientation, right? So like I hear and see your frustration, and I feel that in my body. And there's also like the choice of the mind, right? Like, is the fire the determining factor between a good night and a bad night? Or is it my own internal choice and my ability to like look up at the stars and be grateful and find awe and reverence in those moments? So yeah, there's like this like practical orientation of skills, and then you see this connection emerge, and it starts to, it's like chords and strings going out. And it's sometimes the practicality of like, I'm going to harvest this plant and then I'm going to make cordage from it. I'm going to harvest this plant, I'm going to make fire. But then you start to see that plant everywhere. You start to like remember that moment of making cordage, and you start to realize like the beingness of those plants and creatures, and those threads start to form. And as you go out into the landscape, there's a recognition of these beings all over. And you start to see people settle in. I got to recognize in myself, like the moment of like frustration, and then like the cultivation of connection, and to see that line kind of like spread across. And then also like at the same time, there's like all this like science that's like waking me up to like a reductionist view of why that thing is profound, of like earthing, grounding, like touching the earth, putting your feet and skin on the ground actually attunes you to the frequency, and you're picking up electrons and all of these things. So it's like, it's the realization of both the connection and then the like supporting science. Like, wow, these people are coming in and they're stressed and they're confused, and they all like, everybody chills out. Everybody finds like a healthy weight. Like there are all these things that happen naturally that you see because of like relationship to the land. Like, yeah, like we had a lot of like vegan and vegetarians in the program that ended up eating meat. They're like, wow, like spending time in a cold, damp, wet rainforest, like bone broth is like really good. So there's this level of attunement that you get to see people go through, that in modernity, we get to choose, like, I'm going to choose the temperature of my house. I'm going to choose the clothing, and I'm going to choose the food. And as you see those choices go away, there's like a level of both like acceptance and orientation that start to happen. And it's like those two together, I think I'm realizing in this moment, like maybe that's like what attunement is. It's like I'm kind of accepting what is, like even if it's like a stimulus, and then I'm being oriented to how I can move and play with that energy and at what level. And you see this attunement happen naturally, and you see your dominion over your environment like fade away.
You're like, I'm nothing. Grain of sand. Nothing.
This is what I have to make a fire, and I have to work with it or not, right? I have less choice, and the choice actually becomes more internalized. And I think in our modern day, we externalize all of our choices. Like, if I want to feel warm, I turn the heat up. If I want to go somewhere, I get in my car. If I want to be stimulated, I go on social media. If I want to learn, versus like everything become the concentric ring of choice becomes like closer and closer to the heart. And I think that's what I see like in myself now, and I saw the evolution in the students.
I mean, that's beautiful. And I think this, like, I very rarely use the word attunement, but I think it's a really great word in terms of this kind of, there's so many layers to this. So there's the adaptation, and adaptation is kind of relative to our ability to manage stress. The more adaptive you are, the more resilient you are. The more adaptive and resilient you are, the less stressed you get, because you have this kind of innate belief and knowledge and skill set to be able to manage things around you. And so many of the other things you're saying are really that thing of like, so many people live in a nature deficit, and we're all busy up here in our heads, yet it's like, you just see people like calm, when you take away the noise. But also, like, I love the noise. And so for me as well, it's always, and I think for you as well, you know, you've got a background in tech and, you know, we kind of like travel and you think, and it's not an adversity to stimulation and modern living. It's finding balances because things have got way out of whack. And in the same way, like I'm not going to go and live in a cave. You know, my friend just sent me some videos of this French guy, Charles, who's this barefoot climber in Fontainebleau, and he lives in a cave, and he really like legit lives in his cave. And he's 25. He's like probably the world's most incredible barefoot climber. He's climbing like V15s. I didn't even know there was such a thing. It's insane.
V8 was hard.
Yeah. It's insane. So there's always kind of like the marginal outliers and the mavericks and the extremes, and we hear so much about those. And I think whilst they're great stories to kind of have, I'm always like, yeah, well, what about the rest of us? What about Joe Public just doing their life, who's kind of out of balance, has a nature deficit, and then as a result of that, where does Joe or Jane Public like find themselves to our own authentic way of being? So in the parkour research, it was constantly this like talking to people and like, you know, why do you do it and what does it mean and what happens, and thinking I would just get this like really clever answer because I've been thinking for so long and reading clever stuff and philosophy and research and like it's got to be really clever, and it ended up just being really, really simple. And it was about identity. Or that was one of kind of my conclusions was, in the moment of doing parkour and facing challenges, you get to see who you are in that moment. Outside of the titles, you know, the status, the demographic, the whatever, it's just, you're the only one who can break the jump. You're the only one who can do that move. And to do that move, you have to connect to the environment, whatever that may be, log, bench, tree, wall, ocean, whatever, and you have to connect to yourself. So it's this meeting, an embodiment of your own authentic sense of self. And I feel a lot of the nature immersion and the wilderness school and this evolution and connection of that walks that same path of, but with a different toolkit and a different connection to the environment, which I think kind of goes deeper. I think it has layers of all of this identity of who am I here now? Like me sat swearing at the stars because I couldn't light my fire, was an incredible event and learning and reframe. And then 2 years ago, at the beginning of, well, kind of a couple months into lockdown, I was lucky enough that the land border with Baja was open, and I went with two friends on a surf trip. And on the drive down, we were on the East Coast, the Sea of Cortez, and it was so hot. It was so, and even at midnight, it seemed to be getting even hotter, even hotter. And I was lying in my tent with everything open, and my friend Jared was in another tent, and he was like, "Hey, Jules, are you asleep?" And I was like, "Don't be so stupid. Like, I'm being cooked alive." And then he had a little like battery powered fan, so I think he got some rest. So I went outside, and Pax, my dog, was with me, and we just sat outside, and there was a full moon. It was like the lights were on. I could see the detail of every grain of sand. It was the most kind of incredible, and I stayed awake all night, and it was the most beautiful, magical, incredible, one of the most amazing nights of my life. But it started off as like, oh my God, I'm like sweating and dying here, I'm never going to sleep, and there's no air. And then it was like, just go and look, just go and be and look. Mm-hmm. And it was really beautiful. So nature deficit, I think it's real. I think it's a part of the work that you do. So what are your kind of top tips for those living the modern life, living the, like, you know, if you could go back to Party Kyle and say like, hey dude, like this might be cool for you, or your coworkers or people you know now, like, you know, we probably live less of a mainstream majority life in the decisions we've made, in the projects that we do, and a kind of more minimalist approach to living, of where we decide to put our value and our energy and our resources. So I don't even know where I'm going with this. It's just like, just nature deficit makes me sad. And I know how I feel when I am depleted of it.
Well, yeah, there's a couple things that come up for me, and some of the things that I heard you say. So like one really potent insight was from a woman, Nicole Apelion. She was one of the longest livers of alone women.
Nice.
I think she did like 88 days on Vancouver Island.
Oh, wow.
And I was listening to an interview with her, and she's like, what was the hardest thing about that experience? And her answer was coming back.
Yep.
And it's like this deep sadness. So what you said and what I've experienced, and others might relate to this, is when you're out in nature, you and I do really like the word attunement. I think it's like it has the like subtlety. So when you're out in nature, you are like listening for the quietest sounds, right? You are in a relaxed, wide angle vision, and you are trying to pick up on subtle movements in the landscape, because all of those things are very informative, especially as it relates to both danger, like is that a bear or a deer or a cougar or a chipmunk, as well as to beauty and amazement, so that you can, you know, see the falling leaves and the trickling of the water and the movement of the weasel. So there's this like high refinement of attention, where your attention is picking up on the subtlety. And when you come back into the modern world, when you come back into the city, like they have hijacked that skill that you have, that like natural proclivity to pay attention. Right, like TVs and a lot of technology has like background flashing lights. Like if you ever like slow mode it, you'll see there's this flicker, and you're like evolved to pick up on that. So like when I go to a restaurant, like I can see all of the TVs.
Oh, the screens. And here in North America, there's screens everywhere.
Yeah.
And that still disturbs me. Like in you go to eat food or go for a drink somewhere, and it's like, if people wanted TV, just stay at home, right?
Yeah. And so when you live in that environment, you learn to shut that off, right? Because it's overwhelming. You can't pay attention to all the things that are biting for your attention: billboards, screens, like flashing lights, sounds, right? It's too much to take in, and you very quickly become overwhelmed. So you actually, the orientation is not to turn it down, but to block it out. And it's really sad. Like you are having to turn off the most innate human skill of paying attention, right? Like I believe that your attention is the most valuable thing. It is why advertisers are paying billions of dollars for even a second, a millisecond. They're tracking every little bit of attention. And I believe that what you give attention to, it gives life to things, right? When you give your attention to it, it actually becomes real to you. And the more that we give our attention to something, the more real it actually becomes. And so, yeah, there's a sadness in having to turn that off, because then the bird sounds dampen in the city. The awareness of the nature dampens in the city. So for me, I've learned to cultivate it as a skill of like, instead of an on-off switch, I treat it like a volume knob.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, cool, can I turn the volume up? Can I turn the treble up? Like, I always, like, birds are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so birds for me are a through line to nature connection for anybody, anywhere. And it's like, maybe the volume's down, but the treble is up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm always listening and looking for birds as a thread of connection, as a realization of nature. And as I've gotten into foraging, that's like the base.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people like, foraging in the wild is actually pretty shit, you know? Like, if you go into an old growth forest, there is actually not that much food there.
Uh-huh.
Like, one of the reasons, like, humans have used fire and disturbances because most of the food is in the early succession of a forest.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get the berry, like when a tornado rips through the forest or you go through a clear cut, that's actually where you find all of the berries growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Old growth forests are really great for animals. That's where you're going to find the most animals, the best healthy animals. But you're going to find food in these disturbed environments like a city. I was running foraging classes through Airbnb experiences in Seattle.
Fantastic.
We would get tons of food. You could walk around the neighborhood. There's like pine pollen and blackcap raspberries, thimbleberries, nettles. There's just all kind of abundance. So right now in the fall, like, one of my through lines is walnut trees.
Oh,
So like, there are walnut trees everywhere where I'm at. And people, nobody, zero people that I see, like, there's walnuts all over the ground. Like, nobody is harvesting them. And for me, as like, there's like the practice of like learning about the world, and then there's the living of it. And so the practice of like, you know, harvesting walnuts and like foraging and learning about what they are, that now like kind of like innervates my awareness in a way that I'm always paying attention to some of those key things. Like, I'm driving through the city, my awareness is turned down, but like birds, like arbutus right now, I want to make a necklace. Walnut trees, other nut trees are like highly salient to me. So even if I don't go and harvest, just the fact that I know they exist is I'm forming that thread, and I'm connecting that maybe I will be here in a time when they are harvestable. So that's kind of like my tip is like, the best thing you can do, the easiest thing you can do, is first you have to go outside. Nothing happens unless you go outside the door. And the next thing to do is kind of like you said, is what we call the sit spot, is where you just sit and pay attention. Offer your attention to the external world. And Andrew Huberman just did a really great podcast on meditation. And basically, a sit spot and paying attention to your environment is an external meditation. Like, thoughts might arise, and you think, and you're, instead of like orienting to the breath, you orient to the world around you, and you smell and taste and see and listen, and you just take in the world, and the world will start to reveal beautiful sunsets, like little moments of birds, like, you know, the dappled light through the cloud, like the world, like you could see my face is really bright, right? And in a moment, the light is going to shift, right? So if you're outside and you pay attention, the probability for opportunity of beauty and connection increases every moment. Absolutely.
And for me, this is the art of living, to experience the art of the world around you. So I don't know if you know Dr. Ellen Langer's work. She was kind of the the godmother of mindfulness.
Mm.
And her whole thing about mindfulness is it's about noticing things. Because unless you can notice something, or when you notice something, you give your mind to it. Your mind is there. So her thing of to be more mindful means you have to start noticing things, which is kind of the summary of as you really beautifully just kind of shared this connection and awareness and this multi-sensory experience where the senses are alive. Your auditory senses, the smell, so like I love my morning walks. I have a large dog and it's just like, it's the gift of what we do several times a day, but it always happens absolutely first thing in the morning. And the light, the passing of the seasons, the amount of dew and moisture on the trees now. And then when I come back, even I'm staying with a place with a really beautiful garden. I go out and I spend 10 minutes and I just look at all the plants. Like there's a cactus that's the yellow flowers there. That's about, there's a Persian lime tree. And I'm like picking Persian limes, and there's avocados and there's limes and there's rosemary everywhere. And here in Southern California, like the gardens I see with unpicked fruit on them, I'm like, wow, really? Like no one's going to eat those grapefruits. No one's going to eat those oranges, those limes. They're just decorative. Like, wow. And when you spoke of the walnuts, it actually reminded me of this 2-week experience at the Human Path, where we hadn't eaten, or we'd eaten very, very, very little for 1 or 2 days. And we harvested a rabbit, which was a really interesting experience. I was a vegetarian for 20 years. I hadn't been a vegetarian for, I think, probably 4 years by that point. And we had a rabbit and we soothed it. And I gave so much thank and so much gratitude and grace. And we were taught how to kill the rabbit. And I was like, I decided, like, if I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna be the best at this, there is not going to be a millisecond more of suffering necessary for this. And to also like face the reality of my food. Whereas, a lot of people are very, like, again, there's a huge disconnect from the food chain, from what we're eating. People are like, oh, I don't like that. Like, oh, it looks like flesh. And it's like, well, oh, but the burger doesn't, it's like same. But so we hadn't eaten for a few days. We'd only had a very small amount of food between all of us. And there were some black walnuts on this tree, and the intensity of the flavor from like the smallest portion was just like my jowls went alive, like the saliva in my mouth, the sensation, the texture, the flavor. And here's the thing, you could go and just pick up a bag of walnuts in the supermarket and take out a handful. You could take out like 200 calories worth of walnuts and just shove them down whilst you're driving, doing something. And you would never have this exquisite experience of flavor and taste and texture. And it's kind of that level of awareness of when we're in these this sensory overwhelm of noise, screens, we're disconnected, in our bodies. Our feet are disconnected. Our eyes are, we don't have this peripheral vision anymore. We're very, short and linear. And I see people whose nervous systems are so jacked up. And it's like, well, their circadian rhythms off. They're overstimulated, whether it's through caffeine, food, porn, information, whatever it is. There's this huge disconnect from a sense of being, which gives you a sense of place, which facilitates connection to yourself, connection to others, connection to your environment in all of this. So can you talk, I'm really curious about how kind of what your experience was and is of kind of building community now, like around these values, around nature time, around, and also before that, what do the birds tell you?
The birds tell me everything I need to know. So there's a couple layers to that. So one of the things, like you talked about, like the art of living, I call it the art of belonging. That you, as a human on this earth, you belong as you are, where you are, like full stop. Right? I really like Alan Watts. Like you are made up of your environment. Not only are you made up of like the stardust, but you are made up of the water that you are drinking, the food that you are eating, the minerals, and all the things that come from. And like you said, there's disconnection even in that. Like we don't know. Like I had to really like when we facilitate events, they're typically at places where there's a live running spring.
Nice.
And it takes about 7 days, I think, to replace all of the water in your body. And so like when people leave that experience, like they are of that, they are made of that place. Like that is a level of connection.
Nice.
And in the art of belonging, it's basically an ecology of practices that of paying attention. And the birds are really great because they're everywhere and they're interested in the same things that you're interested in, especially like the robin. There's a really good book by John Young, one of my mentors, called What the Robin Knows.
Oh, nice.
And the robin knows everything. Like, especially if you think about birds, like in the springtime, everything is trying to kill birds and their babies.
You can hear it's kicking off out there in the mornings.
Oh, the dawn chorus, the cacophony. But weasels, raccoons, squirrels, even a deer, other birds of all kinds are all trying to kill a robin and its babies. Same for like juncos and towhees, wrens, things like that. So they have to pay attention. There is no option not to pay attention when everything is trying to kill you. You are like hyper aware. And so in the animal world, similar to the human world, we don't think so, but it's truer than we think, is our body language is communicating like everything. And so the birds are paying attention to your body language and they're like safe, unsafe, right? And in that moment, and then they fly away. So they're both reflecting back to you your state of being, as well as they're informing you about like, is there a hunting cat in the neighborhood? Is there a sleeping deer? Is there a hawk or an eagle nearby, right? All of the birds are aware of these things and they're informing each other. And so, so again, they're paying attention and you can pay attention to what they're paying attention to. And we call that the concentric rings of awareness. So if you throw a rock in the water,
ripple, ripple, ripple. Yeah.
You are having that impact on the nature, on the forest, wherever you go. Like every footstep, every sound is a concentric ring of disturbance. And the more that you can pay attention and be in relationship, you can extend your awareness out and bring the disturbance in. And then more things are revealed to you, and the more you get to see and experience, the more stories you have. And I think it really comes down to story, right? Like this, it's not that like, it's like the story of the rabbit, right? It's the story. It's the story of the walnuts. It's the connection through the story that I think is the deep nourishment, right? Like I have a bracelet, I have a necklace, like that I didn't buy. It was made and gifted to me. and it doesn't look, it's not expensive, it's not like fancy, but it is like deeply meaningful to me. And I think our world is so void of story. And the less story we have, the less connection. Like, I mean, even like this is like my aunt gave this to me. This is her company. It has a little bit of story, but like I have a buckskin vest that like of a deer that I harvested and scraped and tanned and softened and sewed together. Like that vest, the story of that vest is what is meaningful to me. And I think we're so disconnected from the story. Even if you get food from your garden or from, the farmer that grew it, it's every layer of story that you add on is like thickening, right? Like if you have like a fishing line of connection, and then you have like a twine, and that twine is threaded to rope, and then that rope becomes a cord. Like I think those levels of story is actually what I think is where we derive meaning. And when you ask like, oh, where'd you get that? They're like, there's kind of like a guilt. They're like, oh, I just ordered it off Amazon. Like, oh, it's on. Even like a sale is a little bit of a story. It's like a superficial story. It's
I got this bargain.
Oh, because it's like foraging. Like when you find a sale, it's like
it feels good.
You're like, oh, I found something in the environment that was salient, and I took advantage of that moment. So I really believe the more we can, like, the more that we pay attention and the more that we value the subtlety, like the sunset, right? Like it happens every day, right? It could be, anticlimactic, but it's the story of the event that does happen every day. And we're like so disinterested in our own story, right? We're just like, how was your day? Like, what happened? You're like, nothing. You're like, what? You existed on this amazing planet for a 24-hour period, and you have zero relevant excitement of a story. Like me, like people are like, what happened today? And I'm like, oh, like the ocean is right here, the Hood Canal. Like I went in the water for my morning cold plunge and watched the sunrise.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
And then I got to tell people who value that. And because they value it, it adds value to my story, right? Like you ever tell a story to somebody and they like totally ruin it?
So many times.
And you're like, fuck, like I'm not going to tell you my story anymore.
You're like, there's this amazing thing. And then they just go, boop.
Yeah. And now you are less likely to tell your story, and it kind of like slowly depreciates the meaning. So when you talk about like building community, I think community is the hardest thing to do. I have not seen anybody do it well. Even my friend, who I think is doing it the best currently, I'm still seeing how hard and how disjointed it is. So I am really appreciative of the internet and technology that I can send a picture, or like people send pictures of plants and birds to me all the time, right? Like what is like, and I think the importance of community is tending stories well.
Love it.
And even if it's like sometimes like I'm not interested in people's stories. Like
you can't be interested in all of them all of the time.
Yeah, but I can
reach.
But because I understand the importance of it, I can either like fake it a little bit, or better, I can search a little bit deeper for the thing that actually I'm authentically curious about. Like in your story, I was like, ooh, like the cordage, like what plant will you make cordage of? Like, you know, like I want
There's aloe vera, and then I just moved on to something else.
Yeah, and I mean we're in a constrained thing, but like often, you know, it takes effort. So when people are like, I'm like, hey, how was your day? Like, what did you do? What happened? They're like, nothing happened. I'm like, okay, so you didn't do anything. Like you were in a comatose state. And they'll be like, no, like I walked my dog. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, where did you go? Like, oh, I went to the park down by my house. And I was like, awesome. Did you notice, like, were there any birds out? Did you notice anything? And they're like, oh yeah, actually, like I saw some geese at the pond. And, you know, and then so I'm stewarding and I'm drawing out story. And that, like, it makes them more likely to tell me their story. It also makes them more likely to search or to pay attention a little. I'm like, oh, you saw a bird? Like, what color was it? And they might be like, oh, I don't know. And
then
so
maybe
now,
they'll look next time.
Yeah, so exactly. Next time they're going out, and now they are paying a little bit more attention, and then it builds the story. And then because we are connecting around it, it now becomes meaningful. And so I think that's really like what I think is the biggest thing in community is, yeah, tending each other's stories and being interested in each other's stories and not being so quick to like discount it.
Yeah.
Because you can ruin it. And that's why I always tell people, like, save 10% for yourself. Like, you know, or be mindful.
Choose wisely. Choose wisely who you share with. Because I think we've all, even, you know, as a kid, I remember, you know, I would spend hours in my room drawing in the evenings. I would just go to my room and I would just draw. And at the end of the evening, I'd go downstairs and go like, Mom, Dad, look what I did. Like the drawing had real meaning to me. And they go like, oh yeah, nice. Like my parents were both scientists. No interest in this like artistic drawing, illustration, and they just go, oh yeah, nice.
And it's funny, but it's like, oh,
I know, but it's like I was wounded by that. But like, what's lovely is, so this morning on my walk, I had a message from one of my clients, and this idea of nurturing stories and what we value. And so she sent me a beautiful picture of something on her walk this morning, which was, oh, you can't see it this way, like a rainbow. So she sent me a picture of a rainbow.
Oh yeah.
And the trees on her walk. And as I was walking this morning, I had a rainbow.
Oh, sweet.
On my walk. So, and like I love that we have that, because we know we have this appreciation of this nature time and the elements and connecting to it, and of being out of that thing of, I always said, the magic happens outside. The magic happens outside. And I'm grateful for shelter. I'm grateful for all of those things. And God forbid, when you don't have it, you like the idea of someone saying, oh, go outside. You're just like, you have no idea. You have no idea. But finding these stories and connections, like I know, like I could send Mary Beth a picture of like, oh, look at these herbs. Or I'll be like, fucking raccoon came in and just ate all my peppers. Like, and I'm new to the wildlife. Like, I don't know what the deal is with raccoons and my peppers. It doesn't like jalapenos, but it really likes the sweet
boom,
ones.
deepening the story right there. Like, oh, it, like that was like the first thought of my mind. Like, did it eat all the peppers?
No,
or
no jalapenos. But then it came back 3 days later and it ate the jalapenos. But first choice, first couple days, went for the sweet red one. I was like, you little fucker. But like, that's been an experience. Like when I walk in the morning, I love morning light. I love light. I have a thing about light. And one of the great joys to me of living where I'm living right now in Southern California is the quality of the light in the mornings and in the evenings. It's just like to a landscape of beauty, whether it's coming through a cactus or a eucalyptus tree, or like watching the seasons pass, even from like 2 months ago, the plants that are growing in the park, and then seeing what the kind of, I guess, the HOA or the city gardeners or whoever they are that come and like clear stuff. I'm like, oh, they're clearing that right now and giving space to this plant, or is this protecting the soil, or is it I have friends who live a few hours north who, they were caught in the Malibu fires 4 years ago, lost their houses. So there's this awareness of when the warm winds come through. It's not just like, oh, it's really nice and really warm, like, God, it's really windy today. Now it's like, oh no,
yeah,
you can lose all of your belongings. And like the fire jumped to 12-lane highway, and they said, oh no, it's not going to do that. But it did. So this awareness to the environment, like I love water. That's the other thing. And so to experience and to be close to the water, or to a large body of water, I know that the connection I have with people who I share my ocean time with, or if you have people you cold plunge with, even if you just met and I know this from friends in the UK who are kind of open water swimmers all year round, like the community that's built. Mm-hmm. And even this is like they like they turn up in the middle of winter, like woolly hat, maybe some booties. They go in like a couple of minutes, maybe 6 minutes. A friend in Vancouver was doing like 12 minutes at the moment, and I was like, that's a really long time. That is a long time. And for me, I'm always like, I can do the cold bit, but then that'll take me a really long time to warm up.
Yeah.
And then I just want to eat the house for the rest of the day. It's like I just want to lie on the sofa and eat the house. And it's like the best blissed out feeling in the world. And I have to balance that with like, okay, so I think like 2 years ago or so, like my friend Rodrigo and I, who I train with, kind of share movement and barefoot and nature time. We worked out that 7 minutes was optimal for us in the winter. Yeah. Like no more than 7 minutes, no less, no more. That was our sweet spot of like feeling amazing, all the benefits, then still functioning for the rest of the day. But the community I find that gets built through these outdoor, especially nature and movement, like sensory experiences, whether it's the nature walk, whether it's the sit spot. Like Mary Beth and Jemmy introduced me to the sit spot that so like the Hall River next to their property, and just going and spending time there and allowing your disruption to settle, so that, oh, that blue heron is now happy to come back and land on that thing. Because we're just like, excuse me. It's kind of like a Jack and the Beanstalk giant. We're like giants.
Exactly. That's probably how that's how the birds are viewing us, for sure.
Yeah, they're like, shh, just shush. And so our ability to shush paired with an ability and a will to listen and to notice, to share that with someone else is just a next level connection, rather than, shared connections and bonds and meanings can be traversed across many things. I can go to an art gallery with someone and we can deconstruct the photos or the sculpture, and beyond that, I can watch a film with a friend, or you can be in a book club. But there's something about this multisensory connection to self, connection to the environment, shared connection to self, environment, and who you are and how you show up in those environments. And I'm sure, we've both been part of retreats and groups where, for like 5 to 7 days, you're mainly outside with a group of people. And the way you can know those people and the bonds that are built in those 5 to 7 days I find them to be extraordinary. for the number of hours put in. And this isn't like extreme things happening. These are just these kind of shared, these shared stories of noticing, experiencing, and having the senses alive. And I think when we're able to connect more to ourselves, then that facilitates just more connection with others.
Yeah, that's exactly the lens that we view as like connection to self, community, and the living world around you. And I really like one of the big realizations that I had was through the work of John Vervaeke and listening to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And when you were like asking me earlier, like there was so much happening in my time at the Wilderness Awareness School that I was like getting like little insights here and there. And the first like 4 episodes of his podcast was like deeply revelatory of why what you just spoke to, like the deep power and connection of that. And one of the frames that I really like, well, it's like flow state, right? We're like in this flow, we're highly connective to our environment and these people, and we're getting like deeply coupled feedback. So we're like
group flow,
knowing people
flow is powerful.
So we're knowing people, and he defines, I think it's the 4 types of knowing, which I really like. And so there's this like propositional knowing, and that's kind of like that first stage where you're like, hey, like, what's your name? Where are you from? Like, what do you do for work? Like all these like propositions, all of these things. And then you have like procedural knowing, and that's like knowing how to do something, like how to build a table, like how to program software, right? It's just like step-by-step procedure. We can know how to do something. And then there's participatory knowing, where you can only know through participating in a reciprocal, like how do you know what it's like to be in a relationship with somebody? Right? You only know by being in relationship with somebody. You can't be like, well, in order to be in a relationship with somebody, I need to like listen, give feedback, be aware, like
turn up, and
if I do all these things, I will have being in a good relationship. But it's not like that. It's like you have these, you're getting feedback and you're feeling what it's like to be in, and then you have this perspectival knowing, and that's like knowing what it's like to be. And because you are having a shared experience, like when you're playing a game, you both share a perspectival knowing of what it's like to play that game, right? Like, what did that feel like? And so there's these deeper levels of knowing, and there's that thicker thread that's forming between you in a really like an accelerated relational process. Whereas like I know people my whole life, and I connect deeper with somebody at a 7-day retreat than this person I've known my whole life. And partly that's because of the temporariness, because I know I might not see that person again. I can be a little bit more like revealing, a little bit more vulnerable. And maybe I can also like be a little bit more willing to break that relationship, because they're gonna leave, I'm gonna leave, like I'm not gonna see this person.
What happens in nature stays in nature.
Yeah. And yeah, you're just connecting through that experience, and you're building story together. So he also has this frame of like things become real the more senses that we can experience it through.
I agree.
So right, like if I see a ghost, Like, I'm like, maybe I'm hallucinating, but if I like see and hear it and smell it and take, like, it becomes more real to me, right? The more that I experience it. And then if other people are experiencing that same thing, especially like in the supernatural realm, you can't talk yourself out of it. Like, wow, like this, that's like people try to share pictures of the sunset. You're like experiencing the sunset. You're like, whoa, I am like having a profound experience right now. And then if other people are there and they're having that experience, it makes it more real to you, right? And you're like, this, yeah, the sunset's amazing. Is it, you think it's amazing too? Yeah, it's like there's that like feedback loop. And then the story around that builds and solidifies. So I think those experiences in nature are so multi-sensory. Like the cold plunge is again like so profound. The level of connection, like my whole body is alive. I'm seeing it. Like people love to talk about like how bad it was or how like good it was. And it's just, and so I really believe in that. And then the other like connection that I want to make, you talked about like the timing, and I think that's where we can bring in the lens of science that is really helpful, right? Like people have been going in cold water for a really long time. People have been like being barefoot for a really long time. And we used to make fun of those people. We used to discount those people. You're like, this is some like hippie bullshit. Like you are some kind of weird fucking person.
Yeah.
And now like I am so in love with Andrew Huberman and his work and bringing this to the mainstream through the University of Stanford and being like, yes, first of all, light is what dictates all your hunger and hormones. Light is so profound. Okay, here are all the benefits actually of getting in cold water. And then we can break it down into like minimal effective dose through timing. Like, like 3 minutes is a good minimum, right? 5 minutes is a good maximum. You can build up from there. So I think we can take these tools of like things that people do and have done for millennia that are nature-based. We can bring that into community and we can bridge the gap between like hippie bullshit, which there is a lot out there for sure.
Gotta be filtered.
And science, to like interweave those threads to give more opportunity to people, like, you know, and not discounted so quick. And I think that's kind of like, I think that's where we're going. And I see that in like the work that you're doing and many others. It's like, you know, I'm sure like parkour early on, like still is like, it's ridiculous. Like, I don't need movement. I need exercise. Right. And I see, so I'm curious to hear like a little bit about like your journey in maybe like validation or in being seen or accepted in the work that you've been doing.
I mean, it was, you know, like through the years of doing the PhD, there were friends and people who would be like, so Hank, you're researching like people like standing on railings? Sounds kind of weird, like and stupid.
And now, just to like quick jump in, there was just a study that came out that showed your ability to balance.
I know,
like so closely linked. So
it's kind of all there. So, you know, the idea of parkour to begin with, that, you know, I mean, the research started in 2004. So, and things have moved really quickly. And during that time, we then had YouTube, we then have phone cameras, we have Web 2.0, we have da 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 da. So it was a very, and it's a lived culture. But in terms of, it's a, you know, having the letter P, the letter H, and the letter D after your name, people are a lot more willing to listen to what you have to say about people balancing on railings than a person who just goes out and balances on railings. And that's just the, you know, it's like the office white coat syndrome in terms of authority and kind of being listened to, and the ideas around, you know, deep play with honor, of these different layers of meaning and community, and finding value and finding that. So yeah, in terms of I mean, I think we're living in a really, really great time where, like, I have friends who are very into Qigong and Tai Chi and who are Taoists, and the things they've been studying and sharing for the last 20 years, they're like, neuroscience is validating it. Yeah. They're like, Taoists had it right. Like, so there's this really nice meeting of this kind of ancient wisdom across many fields, and our need for like proof and evidence and experiential is not enough. And we have access to tools now that can, you know, like, if you want to be data driven. So like I have a few clients who are really into their aura rings and their sleep. And I recently did the advanced oxygen advantage breathwork training course.
Oh, cool.
And so, and again, it's like, well, everyone breathes. We're all effective at it. Like, we're all pretty good at it. Like, so there can't be much to it, can there? Because like, well, we're all breathing anyway. And then like, you go down the rabbit hole of the science on breathing, and you're just like, fuck, like, it's as important as light. Like, this is crazy. And like, no one's training this, and da, 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 and you think it's just for the yogis. And it's like, well, most of them don't kind of breathe functionally anyway. It's like really interesting. I have a few clients who are yoga teachers, and they've had to completely relearn how to breathe. It's really interesting. But we're all learning everything all the time. But this, there are people who like to track data, and we want the evidence, and data is really good, and it's really, really helpful. And it's also good to know that your own experiences are also valid and are data for you every day. So yeah. I used to know that when I started my day with my first cup of tea, drinking my first hot drink of the day outside, I just always felt amazing. It was always a good day. And I remember saying it to someone like 20 years ago in London, just being like, even if there's just like the tiniest space where I can make a hot drink first thing in the morning and then just stand on the doorstep with that hot drink. And now, you know, we can look at Huberman's work and go, oh yeah, I was getting my morning light. I was getting and that was setting my metabolism. That was setting my circadian rhythm. That was setting my rest and recovery. That was optimizing me. But I knew I just feel really good when I'm outside first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, and then and in the same way, you know, I did my 23andMe DNA thing a couple of years ago. And what did it tell me? Well, I'm predisposed to vitamin D deficiency. What do I love? I love the sun. Like, I'm predisposed to the obesity gene. What do I love? I love moving. So it's kind of like we have our own innate intelligence, and it's really nice to get it validated. And it's also really nice to trust in your own innate intelligence at the same time. So we're all, you know, bio-individual. We're all our own laboratory of research. And I think it's been amazing to kind of have the opportunity to do research and to have participatory, you know, my role in the parkour world was at the beginning of the research was to be the documenter, to become part of the community and to document it and create this feedback loop of, I would kind of film it. That was my methodology for asking questions. And then I would show the films I made back to the people I'd filmed, and their answers would feed into a loop of, well, what I filmed next. It was a constant feedback loop of question and answer. And my questions, because I was going to share these questions, research is just, what's your original contribution to knowledge? That's like the validation of any PhD is, what is your original contribution to knowledge that can build off an existing body of work? If you've got that, you can do a PhD in anything. Like, but it has to be those things. So it really was about then, well, I'm going to take this question and answer session, which is done via the methodology of short films. And then I'm going to share it with people who aren't in the parkour world. It wasn't just for the parkour world. It was an understanding of difference and what can we learn from one another. And this is the tool that I'm using to do that. Some people use words. My friend Alex, he did a parkour themed PhD, and he used illustrations.
Oh, cool.
And cartoons, because that was his craft. Filmmaking, audiovisual work, that's my craft. That was something I was kind of trained in. So I could employ that for this question and answer session about understanding one culture so that I could help share the values from that with another culture. So what can one person standing on a railing, how can that benefit someone sat at an office doing data input? It's like you have to be able to kind of join the dots between the two and say, well, this is about connection. This is about finding out who you are, connection to the world, in the moment, being present, finding flow state, seeing who you are. And there's a lot of excitement about the imagination in parkour, because it's beautiful to see things and use things in ways they weren't designed for.
Yeah.
Particularly in the urban landscape. We've been doing it in nature since day one, because that's the playground that we kind of move in as kids. And then we're told, but if you
ancestral humans.
Yeah. So, but as soon as you start, doing the same thing, you would jump over a log, you start doing that with a wall in an urban landscape. If you use the urban furniture there, then a lot of the time people find it alarming and they just say, like, get down from there. So what's been wonderful is just to see, not everywhere, but in so many different places, that has now become more welcoming. Like, you can go to places and they'll be like, oh, parkour. Oh, you're doing that.
Oh, you're doing parkour.
Yeah.
Versus like, hey, get up there.
And I remember seeing an episode of Modern Family where the kid was flying a drone over a neighbor's garden and they were trying to make a parkour film. And I remember at the time, like, sending a message to Thomas Quidditch going, oh my God, parkour just got referenced in an episode of Modern Family.
Nice.
And this was at a time when a lot of people in the parkour world just kind of knew who everyone else was, because it was still so small. Like, even like internationally. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, but its growth has just been like, so I think I went on a really big tangent there, but in terms of like research, validation, these kind of changing ways of being are inherent. So I want to kind of tie this up. So go outside, have nature. What is that one other thing? I like things in threes. I always believe in the magic of threes. Three is the magic number.
Pay attention.
Beautiful.
But I would say, well, it's go outside. Nature is everywhere in everything. Like, there is no not nature. Like, even like, I think about environments as like modified or not modified. Mm-hmm. Like, we live in a highly modified environment that is made up of nature. Your house is all wood from trees. The road is ground down mountains, right? Like, there is really not nature. So really, for me,
that's a beautiful reframe, by the way.
And yeah, like, and just to add to what you said, I think of like experience, evolution, and science as three different lenses that I try to create a Venn diagram for. Like, cool, like, science tells me the benefits of cold training. I know, like, native tribes and indigenous cultures, and that just cold water is like, they're like, hot water is really not a thing, right? If you've ever like had to weave a bark basket and heat up rocks to make hot water is not a thing in nature other than a hot spring. So you have science, evolution, and then, like you said, my own experience is that I feel alive and connected. So I like to lay those lenses over, and that ties into what we're saying, because it's like, go outside, right? We know evolutionarily that outside, there was no inside, right? Like,
not much. Yeah.
we know the science, the phytochemicals, the sunlight, the wind, the sensory, the seeing the color green is de-stressing. And then have your own experience. Notice, actually, like, be as present as you can in the moment of how are you feeling before, how do you feel during, and how do you feel after that experience, to have your own validation. You're like, cool, science says it's good, seems to make sense through an evolutionary lens, and like my own experience is actually that. So the encouragement and the practice at like the lowest level that I think anybody can do is anybody can go outside. Right? Yeah. If you have a balcony, a porch, you have a door, you somehow got inside, that means you can go outside. And you can sit, you can stand, you can walk, whatever it is, whatever you're needing to do, like, it's like the vehicle. And simply, like you said, just notice as much as you can. And notice maybe only the things that you can notice. Right? My teacher really has this beautiful lens. Is like, we all have a deep desire to be loved and appreciated, right? And when people notice us and see us, we become more real to the world, right? We become like, oh, you noticed me? You're like, oh, thank you. And I believe that everything, every plant, every tree, every animal, bird, fungi, everything on the earth has a deep desire to be noticed, to be loved and appreciated. And maybe there's something out there that only you can notice, right? There's something out there that only Julie can notice. We'd be walking down the same path. I notice my own things, you notice your own things. And if we all started noticing and appreciating, we would not only make the world more real, but we would offer that love and appreciation to those things out there that are needing it, that are wanting it, that maybe have waited hundreds of years for you to come along and notice that thing. And even if it's for a moment, I think that's enough. So yeah, go outside, sit, walk, stand, move, and notice and pay attention to anything and everything that only you can.
I love it. This is really an embodied mindfulness. This is just living the mindfulness, rather than, you're not just closing your eyes and sitting on a mat with introspection. So thank you so much. Where can people find you? What are you up to right now?
Yeah. What am I up to right now? I'm taking invitations. So through Evolve, Move, Play, we have a bunch of retreats that are May, June, July, May through October. We have one retreat a month. Many of those are already sold out, or there's only a few spots left. So I'm in this in-between period between now and May, where I am following invitations. Nice. So I have an invitation to come down to California and facilitate an experience with a lady in her community. I have some invitations to go up to Canada and facilitate some experiences. So right now I'm following invitations, and then I'm kind of like feeling into those and how do those feel. So I'm in a really blessed place in my life where I have lots of time off. I'm doing a lot of like training is really my focus. But if there's a salient and a worthwhile invitation to come and facilitate an experience, I'm doing that. So you can email me, Kyle@trottingsparrow.com. I'm active on Instagram, Trotting Sparrow, but I've been earning my time on Instagram through catching leaves, which I've been very poor at recently. So my Instagram time is thankfully diminished. But yeah, you can find me on social media, reach out if you have an invitation. Otherwise, go to evolvemoveplay.com if you want to sign up for one of our retreats. And yeah, that's what's happening currently.
It's a beautiful seasonal life, which is very appropriate for such a seasonally, environmentally in tuned individual as yourself. And I love the 3 E's. I mean, I scribbled a few notes down here of like this conversation, which I know could kind of go on for hours, with layers of the story and wilderness therapy and what it means to survive and to connect and create community through story, and this art of belonging and attunement and connection with environment, evolution and experience. So thank you. This has enriched my day. It started with a walk outside and a rainbow, and now like so to connect. So I feel like this conversation has been a while coming, and I'm sure there'll be more. And so I really appreciate you. I appreciate everything you share. I love seeing both your kind of nature, survival, wilderness appreciation, and just your authentic living through your knowledge as well, by kind of following you. And you're a badass mover as well. Like seeing, I love how you move in the environments that you're moving in, because so often we only see those around set obstacles, but you're like building shelters and logs in the snow. The things I saw you do on like trees in the snow, I was like, I don't think I've ever seen an image of that before. Like, so you've created some really like some new stories of possibility, of those things have always been possible, but to see them is another layer of invitation. The kind of see and do, like to see it makes it easier to be it, to do it, to know like this exists, this person, this idea, this thing. So I appreciate you and everything you do, and please keep sharing. And I will put everything, all your information in notes. And yeah, people reach out to Kyle and get him over, get him to your place and host a retreat. And I know it nearly happened a few times in the past 12 months, but I know like it's just like this, when the stars align, they're going to align. That I will see you in person to do an experience with you, because I think I'm very open to that, and to nature, and to bring some friends and enjoy that. So thank you so much. Any final thoughts or anything else?
I just want to thank you and appreciate you. You've been a huge inspiration in what it means to, age dynamically and to be an example of possibility, and really shift the narrative around aging. Like so many people are like, just wait till you're my age. Like, oh, you're going to like, eventually you're not going to, oh, you're going to, right? The aging narrative is really depressing. And to see you do it beautifully and with like skill and grace, and to be bringing others along on the journey, like really gives me and a lot of others like hope, and knowing that like it doesn't just end. You don't just like all of a sudden get old and stuck one day.
Gets better
through work and attention and cultivation, that you can age beautifully and skillfully and still have access to play and opportunity and insight. So I just super appreciate you and your work and all that you're bringing into the world. Gives me a lot.
Thank you. Cool. Well, thank you so much, and happy Wednesday, and thank you, and we will connect again soon, I'm sure.
All right, take care, Julie.
Let me stop recording.